Welcome back to 50 Days to Rebuild, the series where I read 50 pages of a physio book and do 50 minutes of exercise in a day. This is day 9. Jumping into the exercises for today, I just want to touch on some of the wrist exercises. I think I've included these in a few videos but not really explained what I'm doing here. It might just look like some basic wrist flexion and extension, and it is. But this is something that I've had issues with for a long time from rock climbing or from gym in general. And most of the time I was very dissatisfied with the information around wrist work. Often it was said that these are really persistent injuries, kind of in a very hopeless sense. And also, most of the time it was like, just flex your wrist and that's the rehab. I was very dissatisfied with this because the wrist is actually like a relatively complex joint capable of rotation, abduction, adduction, flexion, and extension. And exclusively saying, let's just flex the wrist, when a lot of different things could have caused injury, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Even that though, I've often had troubles with the flexion. Right, so what I discovered a few weeks ago was I was essentially trying to apply the laws of torque described by Kelly Starrett. Now I found these laws of torque quite esoteric for some time and not really ever understood why they are there, but sort of took them at face value. Essentially, they state that if we're entering flexion, we should externally rotate, and if we're entering extension, we should internally rotate, with some nuances around if the elbows are bent, then we should basically just be externally rotating. He really kind of just applied this to the hip and the shoulder, but I've never seen anybody apply this to the wrist. So I thought I'd give that a shot. Instantly had way more success. Went from this really painful cracking, couldn't get a full fist when I was actually doing these exercises, sort of had to be kind of lax in my grip. All of a sudden I can squeeze tightly. I am not hurting at all. So I just wanted to highlight this. Yes, it's a simple exercise, but sort of nuanced cue change that I haven't heard mentioned anywhere that I've been doing that I've been finding really helpful. As usual, went through the McGill Big 3. That's all going well, so I'm not really going to go too deep into all of that. I'm just happy it's working. But looking at the serratus wall slide, like I said in the last video, a bit scared, but I think I need to do this more, just as a way to sort of work on that upward rotation with posterior tilt and external rotation. This went a lot better today, really trying to get that feeling of a back spread sort of between the humerus and the armpit sort of area. That worked, and then going up the wall, I really didn't try and push the range. I noticed that, say like, I don't know, an extra 30, 45 degrees overhead was when I was starting to get shaky in previous ones, like previous days when I've done this. So I sort of just was very calm with the range of motion, didn't try and go beyond what was good, but it felt a lot better than it has previously, so I'm very happy with that. So then I've tried to apply this to the bench, because it was kind of the whole idea is, let's work that area directly before we get into like a bigger compound movement, and I'm feeling much happier with this bench. Again, just felt like I could combine these different scapular motions better. This upward rotation is starting to feel better, and then mixing that with the posterior tilt, feeling much better, and I think the bar path was better as well. So I'm not saying it's perfect yet, but I'm getting to a point where I'm feeling like if I can just get this a little bit better, I might be able to start loading it, which is very exciting. Moving on to what I learned today. So still reading Your Spine, Your Yoga. Like I said, I don't know if it's the perfect book for me right now, but I think there are still some kernels of like really good information, so I might keep trying to push through for now. I think the first thing to really touch on here that they described in some detail was nutation and counter-nutation. This is the term I encountered a while ago when I first stumbled over this technique called these people called like the Postural Rehabilitation Institute. It's kind of confusing. I'll try and simplify it as much as I can based on what I think is happening. Basically, the sacrum, so the bottom of the spine, is moving forward relative to the ilia, so the big wings of the pelvis, and that's called nutation, and counter-nutation is the opposite. So the sacrum is moving backwards relative to the ilia, which are moving forward. Now I think the key thing here is it's relative, so it's not necessarily that one or the other is moving, it's that it's a relative change. So it might be the ilia or the sacrum or both, I think. Like I said, kind of a confusing topic. The reason this is important is that counter-nutation was linked with SI strain. So the sacroiliac joints, which again on myself are really quite laxed, so we don't really put too much strain through them. So if we're ever getting into a situation where we have counter-nutation, it's pretty much any type of posture where we have extension. So like a lunge, for example, we're probably going to counter-nutate, apparently. So if we want to reduce strain on the SI joints, there's a few things we could do if we're doing some sort of yoga or exercise movement. One is that if we're doing a symmetrical movement, except for a back bend, we're pretty much always going to be in nutation, which was this more stable position, provided it was a symmetrical movement. So we're not doing anything asymmetric. If we are doing something asymmetric, we're going to put more load on it. So if it's really sensitive, we're kind of just avoiding asymmetric and back bends. And then otherwise, we're looking at some other strategies to reduce the load. So one of those strategies is if we're doing anything rotational, we need to think about where we're generating the rotation from. So basically, the spine will transmit force up it as each segment sort of reaches the end of its rotational capacity. So each segment being each vertebra. So if I lock the pelvis down and start generating movement from the upper body, like in the shoulders, that's going to reduce strain on my SI joint. This does take into as an assumption though that my spine isn't just absolutely bloody rigid. If it's super duper tight, basically any level of rotation, it's going to transmit super quickly down the spine into the SI joints. So if that's the case, essentially want to try and avoid rotation to some degree if it's really severe SI joint laxity. Otherwise, we just want to lock the pelvis down and try and get some shoulder sort of rotation, upper back rotation, rather than trying to lock the shoulders down and then get hip rotation. Again, on these twists, if we're doing like a seated twist, apparently we want to try and abduct or also bring the hip backwards that we're turning towards. Apparently this would just help reduce some strain through some of the connective tissue through there and therefore through some of the SI joint. The other main strategy around how to alleviate stress through the SI joint was basically just to stiffen through there by co-contracting other muscles. So there's a whole array of ways to do this. One is that we're trying to activate the erector spine and the multifidi, which is just these deep muscles along the spine. I'm not sure how to just activate those at will, but that's interesting. Also, we could try and activate the glute max and the lats together. That will help stabilize. Or the pelvic floor plus the abdominal muscles. They actually specified, especially in women, but just in general potentially, if you only activate the pelvic floor, you might just enter counter nutation, so make sure you have the abs on. And also just generally, they said if your abs are on, that can help reduce some of the strain in that SI joint. Moving on from the SI joints, if we're just encountering difficulties with hip flexion generally, apparently the idea is we want to try and release the hamstrings just to increase some of that range. Started covering a little bit about the lower back here, and there was one or two pieces of information that I thought were interesting. One is the superficial muscles of the back, so the most shallow. If we're activating those, generally what we're going to see is some sort of lateral flexion or ipsilateral rotation or both. So this is something that I noticed whenever I watch some of this footage back of me exercising, is often when I'm trying to figure out some of these shoulder movements and braces, I do laterally flex and sometimes rotate. And I think often it's because I'm trying to activate the lat. So it might speak to the fact that I might need to activate the opposite side just as a stabilizer while I'm trying to do this. The last thing that I thought was really of interest in this idea of how much movement in the spine can we tolerate, the author says that the first things to go on the spine are normally these posterior ligaments, and that they can withstand about or just shy of 70, I think it was Newton meters. Don't really know the measurement too well, but that was just an interesting piece of information because I want to know what my spine can take. That was a healthy spine, so mine can probably take less. But I just think that's a very important thing to figure out, to see is a movement like a Jefferson curl possible? Or maybe a movement like a Jefferson curl is possible because they've actually strengthened the ligaments or something like that to be able to withstand it. But on that note, apparently if you get hypertrophy in some of these ligaments, it can lead to stenosis, which is a narrowing of this gap in the spine that the spinal cord runs through, which isn't good. It can lead to a whole lot of nerve issues. So I don't even know if you want to sort of thicken and strengthen through there, or at least you don't want hypertrophy. Maybe you just want like a denser strength as opposed to a bodybuilding type of hypertrophy. I'm not sure, but I just thought that was an intriguing piece of info. And yeah, that's it. Still not sure if I should continue with this book or not, but to be honest, it won't take me very long to gun through it. And yeah, that is day 9, and I will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.